Good morning, Artificial Hearts family. We're so glad to be here. We took a little hiatus for Thanksgiving break, but now we're back with a very special guest all the way from Germany. I want us to give a warm greeting to Professor Christoph
Thank you.
Gartz. Christoph Gartz, thank you so much, Dr. Gartz, for being here with us on the platform. I know it's been a while. We try to work this almost a few months in advance, but we're really happy that you're here with us and that we can have a live to talk about a very important topic, which is Dostoevsky today.
Mhm. Yeah. Good afternoon, I have to say, because in Germany we have already 3 p.m. It is
Right.
now. And I want to greet you from Bochum, which is a city in the west of Germany. It is not very far away from Dortmund and Cologne, North Rhine-Westphalia. And I'm teaching at the Ruhr University, Bochum. That's my hometown. That's my home university.
Perfect. And thank you for doing that introduction for us. But I wanted maybe just to, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, Dr. Garth, for our audience, for maybe the folks that don't know you. You're a scholar of Dostoevsky. You're a teacher in Germany at a university at a big university. And I wanted to know how did you come in contact with Dostoevsky, right? Being in Germany. And also, I think a lot of our viewers are probably very curious to know how was your first contact with specifically the brothers Karamazov?
Yeah, I have to admit that my first contact with Brother Karamazov, with Dostoevsky, I would say, wasn't at university, because a little bit earlier, when I became 14 years old, so I wanted to read really everything I got. It was this time when maybe you know it. But we are living here in a, I would say, it's a working place. People here are not very keen on academic education. They are coal miners, I would say, like, yeah, you know it, not like Princeton, but I would say like
West
Detroit
Virginia
or
here.
something else.
Here will
Yeah,
be West
yeah.
Virginia. Yeah, West Virginia.
Maybe. So my father worked at a coal mine, and we had no library, of course, at home. It was not, we are not used to this. And so I asked, when I became 14, I asked a friend of mine, my uncle, I would say, he was a little bit like a friend, which books do I have to read if I want to know, if I want to know more about God, about living in the world, about the meaning of the world. And he told me, you have to read two books. And I said, which one? The first is from Dante, the Divine Comedy, I
Oh
would
yeah.
say. And the second one is Brothers Karamazov,
Ah.
and from Dostoevsky. And so I bought these books, very cheap books, and read. I have to admit that the Dante's Divine Commedia was a little bit, it was
Dull.
heavy. It was
Yeah.
really heavy for a 14-year-old boy. Uh, but the Brothers Karamazov, they hit me at once. It was really astonishing. I read this book in 2 weeks, I don't know, and everything was
Wow.
interesting. Everything was new. I missed the name, of course. It's really difficult.
And it's a thousand
Who-
pages, just to explain to our audience. Like it's a big book to read in two
Yeah,
weeks.
yeah. It is a real big book. Yes, of course, in German translation, we have good translations in Germany. Yes, of course. But then it was my subject. So next book I bought was Crime and Punishment. I read when I became 17, 18. Had already read all the books of Dostoevsky. It was before before I became a student. Yes, of course.
Oh, that's amazing. So your first contact then with Dostoevsky was through the brothers Karamazov. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
And you said that it hit you like once. And I wanted to know like how was that kind of a feeling? Because from what you're telling me, like you were approaching it first as a not as a scholar, but as a layperson, right? How
Mhm.
was it in your reality living in that community of coal miners? How real, I guess, was it to you? Like the themes and the topics of the book. How did it hit you coming from that background?
Yeah, I would say it is. there's no difference between the people living here, working class people, and the seeking for to get answers, to know much more about the world. That's so there is no great difference. And yes, of course, our family was a Christian family. We had, of course, Bible at home, and therefore there was some ground, I would say, but not the questions Ivan Karamazov uh, made. This was the thing I would really say, which was mostly approaching to me, which was mostly interesting for me, for a 14-year-old boy. The questions, especially the questions of Ivan Karamazov. And that's a fact, of course. It's much more interesting what he does than Starrett Sosima tells us in the next books, I would say. Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about this, just maybe for like our audience that isn't familiar with
Mhm.
those questions? Like
Yeah,
a
there's a
preview. I mean, we don't have to go. Kind of, it's a big book.
yeah, there is yeah, Ivan is one of the brothers. Karamazov is 20, I think 23. He is about 23, sometimes he's 24, and he is between Alyosha, the youngest one, and Mitya, the oldest one of the brothers. And he is a student. He already wrote an article about questions of the or of God. And there is a meeting with his brothers, with his young brother Alyosha, who is going to be a monk, and Ivan is on telling a lot of things about the rebellion against God, and he don't want to. Yeah, he has this special meaning. He says that if there is a God, maybe there is one, but I don't accept him. That's it. So it's not a question about God. Is there a God or is there not a God? Yes, there is a God, but I don't accept his creation. And this was
Mm,
a wonderful question, I would say.
yeah.
And then he talked to his brother, his younger brother, and then he tells, of course, I think we are going to talk about it, the legend of the Grand Inquisitor, which will be which is a very wonderful text, I would say. Yeah.
Oh wow. No, that's great. And I definitely we're gonna talk more about that, especially the
Mhm.
legend of the Grand Inquisitor, because I know that's such an important a central key passage in this really classic work. But as we kind of conclude this kind of introductory block of our program, right now, I wanted to know, how did you become, right? How did you come from this town, working class town, and become a scholar of Dostoevsky?
Yeah.
Like, what was that journey like and that process?
It was a long way, I have to admit, because I didn't study, of course, here in my hometown. I went to Heidelberg University. Maybe
Oh,
it's very well known,
yeah,
Heidelberg, of course,
of
but
course.
not for studying Russian literature, something else, but for studying medicine. Because after I went from school, we have 13 years school, then there was the obligation for us, for young people in Germany at that time, uh, you have to go to the military, or you have to go to the to become a soldier, or you can do something like civil service, I would
Right.
say. Civil service. You can, and I worked in home for old people. And in this home for old people, I thought it's wonderful. I would like to study medicine, and I got a place at the University of Heidelberg, and came to Heidelberg and studied for half a year. And I mentioned, no, that's not my job. That's not the thing I wanted to do. And then I knew that I was keen on reading. I read everything. And I said, okay, I will become a literary scholar. I will study literature. And of course, you study at first Germanistic German literature, of course. Yeah. And the second one I didn't know. I thought, oh, philosophy. Okay, let's study philosophy. And I went to the building. It's in the old city of Heidelberg where they study philosophy. I wanted to visit the library there. I came into this building and I was wrong about the door. I was wrong about the door at the university. Originally, I wanted to, as I said, to study philosophy. I came into this library and saw this strange letters, books with strange letters and so on. And I asked the person sitting there, and what's that? Oh, that's Slavic literature. These are Russian books. And I said, okay, why not? And I studied German literature and started to begin Russian literature. And this was, of course, very, because I couldn't speak a single Russian word. It was totally strange for me. But it was no problem. After 2 years, I spoke Russian, okay, more or less fluently. And the other phase is that at Heidelberg University, in the Russian department, there was my teacher, Professor Gehrig, Horst-Jürgen Gehrig. He's one of the best known experts in Russian literature, and especially in Dostoevsky, all over Germany, all over German-speaking countries. And of course, then my future way was already done. I had to do it in this way. Yeah, because I wanted to remember him. Horst-Jürgen Gehrig is a professor who was also founding the International Dostoevsky Society. This one was founded in 1971 in Bad Ems. It's a German city, which is a spa city, I would say. Dostoevsky has been there for 5 times. And so in 1971, when my Dr. Father, he was very young, and when he decided to go there, they made a conference with international scholars. I think Robert Louis Jackson was there, the old names from the American universities, they were there, and they decided to found the International Dostoevsky Society.
So it was
And
founded in Germany? The
it
internet.
started in Germany,
Wow.
1971, in Bad Ems. Bad Ems is this town where Dostoevsky was 3 or 4 times. And so it was it was very clear. I was the first time I was at one of the conferences from the International Dostoevsky Society when it was in Austria in 1995. I met all the old names, the great names of like Georgi Friedlander, who made the big edition of Dostoevsky in Russia with the 30 volumes, Polное собрание сочинений. And so that was my way. And now 30 years, I'm like an expert, I would say, like a scholar. I handle Dostoevsky. Although the first impressions of your reading are the most important, I would say.
Wow, that's good. That's well, why do you say that?
Yeah, because if you do it as a scholar, it's like an object, I would say. Like Dostoevsky is not an object. He always talks especially directly to your heart, and so it's very difficult to separate these two bases. So you have your personal feelings and the object as as a part of your scientific career, I would say. Yeah.
No, well that's really cool. I like how you say like the work of Dostoevsky is something that it's really designed to kind of hit the person in their most innermost naked self, you know.
Yeah.
And I think like from what I'm understanding, it's like when and I think that's the tendency when you turn something into an object of scholarship, you can depersonalize it, right?
Yeah.
And take away its individuality or its meaning, right? To
Mm.
use a very like Dostoevskian term. And before we wrap up this segment of our block, our viewers and the people who are going to be watching I think they're curious to know who's your favorite character in the Brothers Karamazov, and if you were to recommend for somebody, you know, somebody like maybe your younger self or anybody who wants to read Dostoevsky, what book should they start with? So your favorite character and what book should they start with if you were to recommend?
Favorite character, it's difficult to say because none of the main characters is a consistently positive character in the Brothers Karamazov.
Mhm.
It's a little bit different, I would say, in Crime and Punishment. There you have Razumikhin. Maybe you know him. Razumikhin is a person who is always straight. He's a good guy, I would say, and that's okay. I would say that each brother is partly fascinating and attractive, but on the other hand, he's partly disgusting and repelling. I would say even Alyosha is not a consistently positive character, isn't? I think you have to look, if you look at Brothers Karamazov, you have to look about to the children which are represented there. There's very interesting. The main part of the book is concerned with the development of the children, Alyosha and the children coming together. And there is, of course, a person, this 14-year-old Kolya Krasotkin. Maybe this one could be a positive figure. You know that Dostoevsky planned to do another 2 books on the brother Karamazov. There was planned for the second and the third one. Alyosha had to go out in the world and anything else.
And become like a bad guy.
Yeah, like a bad guy. Yeah, Dostoevsky even thought about that Alyosha could assassinate the Tsar.
Oh wow.
Yeah, yeah. One
That
of
was
the
the plot.
plans.
Oh
One
wow.
of the plans is in this direction. Really. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
It's real tragic because you know that Dostoevsky died in January 1881, and in March 1881. Alexander the
Second,
Second
right?
was,
Alexander
yeah,
second.
he was assassinated 2 months later after he did.
Wow.
I don't know whether Dostoevsky had experienced the assassination or what he would have said.
Because
So,
Alexander the Second had a lot of plots on him, right? So maybe that
yeah.
was in the back of his head, right? Like, okay, people
Mhm.
are trying to kill the Tsar. Wow.
Maybe you don't even know. So yeah, so that's favorite character, difficult to say. Maybe Kolya Krasotkin in the second part of the book, in the
Mm.
second part, I would say. On the other hand, you ask about reading which one you should read at first, which one of the works of Dostoevsky. And it sounds a little bit strange, but I would recommend reading Gogol at first before
Oh,
reading Dostoevsky, especially Gogol's Petersburg stories. You know the short stories with,
yeah.
of Petersburg, from which Gogol made, even Chanel and all the other one. But I would say, so if you are prepared through Gogol, then you can start with the first short stories of Dostoevsky, like Poor Folk. I would recommend. Poor Folk is very one. If you don't know anything about Dostoevsky, start maybe with this, or the oh, how's it called in English? Unižné skrblionné. Yeah. Uh,
Notes from the Underground, Memories from the House
no,
of the Dead,
no,
White Knights, the
White
Double,
Knight, of
White
course,
Knight.
yeah, but Asclepion, I don't, naja, it's not as important. Of course,
Oh,
White Knights is very important. All the things he wrote before he came to Siberia, they are important. Because when he came back from Siberia, from this 10 years in the Katorga, he, I would say, he wrote a little bit different. And Notes from the Underground, that it's of course it's can be seen also in the early writing, but that's something different. So I would start with the early writings, short stories for
and,
before
and
48.
and sorry to interrupt. How do you think it changed after he came back from Siberia?
Um, I think when he came back, he was a politician, which is not as easy to see in his works before 48. Of course, he was member of the discussion club, the Petroshevtsi, the young students there, but he wasn't in his works. You can see the political feeling, the political ambitions he had when he came back from Siberia. His work, they are more complex, only the human being, the questions about the human being, of feeling of love and disappointment of love and so on. So it's a little bit easier to understand, especially for a younger person. When he came back, then it's definitely a politic political meaning in his works, much more than before.
And I also wanted, I'm always curious when I ask a lot of like Dostoevsky scholars that we have on the show, um, what do you think is the message of the Brothers Karamazov? I mean, I know it's all, you always have to be careful about not reducing, but what is one of, like, in your opinion, having read it when you were 14, reading it now, teaching it, what do you think is one of the major themes of this book, or what this book is about?
Yeah. The main message, not only for a young reader, but I would say for any person who tends to think about the world as such, is that all your questions, all your doubts about God the Almighty, the sense of evil in the world, about um, sense of living, and so all these questions have already been asked and treated. So Dostoevsky always tried to give an answer to these questions, but the answers, they are not very convincing, I would say. But the questions he raised, they are really important, and they are really, yeah, he questioned them. He asked them, and so if you think you are alone in the world, just read Dostoevsky and you will see you are not alone. All the people, there are a lot of people in the world with the same problems, the same sorrows, the same doubts, the same questions, I would say. Yeah. And so
The,
you see in the Brothers Karamazov, especially the treating of these eternal questions, I would say.
would those questions be like, why do we suffer? Is there a God?
Yeah.
Why is there
What's the
death?
sense of evil in the world? Why
What
is there evil? Why is there cruelty? Why is it in the world? So you see the children, they are beating each other time by time, and you see that's the parents, and so why is it evil in the world? Yeah, that's a question, of course. But you don't. On the other hand, it's not. You can't read it and think, so I will get the answer. The answer is not Dostoevsky, I would say. Dostoevsky gives the questions.
Fantastic. And if you want to continue to see more great programming like the one you're seeing now with Professor Christoph Gartz, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and support us with our buying our merchandise. And you can get yours now, your Artificial Hearts t-shirt inspired on the brothers Karamazov. And now we're back to our second block. Professor Gartz, I read in your bio that you have done some significant research in the social history of Russia at the time of Dostoevsky. And I think I think, like you said, this is a book that, like, anybody can really relate to, because it deals with these very profound human questions that we all ask, regardless of our culture, regardless of our geographical borders. But I think it also helps to understand a little bit of the history, like what was going on in the mind of, the writer. And I wanted to know from your research, what was the world like in the days of Dostoevsky? What kind of world was he born to? How is it kind of different and similar to the world that we live in in the West today?
So we have to be aware that this time was a time in which 90% or much more of the population had to fight for their daily bread every day. They were not concerned about, I would say, literature and fine arts. They couldn't read or write a word. So more than 92%. And it was a world. So we are sitting in a warm room. I don't know. Don't mind what we are eating, going to eat this evening. So we don't have so much problems like at that time. And we had to be aware that were living in conditions without without human rights, without feeling that they could ever be heard. So the difference between the small elite living in Petersburg or in Moscow and, I would say, 95% of the people, it was enormous. And that's very interesting that there was no communication between the different classes of the society. The urban intelligence, they tried to be the mouth of these underprivileged classes, and but they didn't know anything about them. It was Dostoevsky who said, I am the one who knows the people, but only for the reason that he has been to the katorga, that he has been to Siberia, and he has been lived door to door or bed to bed, it's much better, with the members of the people. And when he came back from the, no, I know what the people want. And this is always important to know that at this time there we have two different studies. I would say that the one Dostoevsky talks to is very contemporary persons. He wanted to change the life in Russia in the year 1862, in the year 1863, and so on. And when we read these books, we often forget it. We often forget that this is really a question about the daily sorrows, about the daily civil concerns they have at that time, society concerns. So you know that after that, under Alexander II, there were a lot of reforms going on. There were in judicial places, and he commented, Dostoevsky always commented it, and he always wanted to be a part of the community, talking about sense of this reforms,
What
and
were some
therefore,
of the reforms? Sorry to interrupt again, Professor Garska,
yeah,
for the
yes,
audience
of
that
course.
might not be familiar.
Yeah, you know that in 1861 there were slavery was done. Even the Russians always said 4 years before the Americans did it. There, so a reformation became that the people living on agricultural farms, they were not slaves like anymore. And in 1864 there was a judicial reform that was very, very progressive. After 1864, the people had much more rights before the court than in any other country in Europe. It was really astonishing. And if you read the books of Dostoevsky, you always see that there is a trial, justice is very important, and that's only can only be understood if you see at these reforms which were going on. So it was a very, I would say, hot time, the 60s, the 60s, the 70s, and there was a really deep discussions about where do we go, what about the future of the Russian society, and yeah, Dostoevsky is a part of this discussion always. Yeah.
Oh wow, that's amazing. And I wanted to ask you on that note, especially given all these very important social issues, questions of emancipation, of Russian society in the 19th century. How did Dostoevsky understand the other, like quote unquote? And by the other, I mean what we would call kind of the West, right? Because I think that's something that kind of figures in his writing, uh, like the Russia versus the outside of Russia. And how does this help or challenge his understanding or our understanding of modernity?
Yeah, you know that at that time in Russia there's existed two different parts of intellectual groups, I would say. The one who said Russia has to develop like Europe. We are, we are a little bit behind Europe, but we have to go the same way like Europe, and we will become a modern civilized country. And there was another group, which was this was the Westlers, so the other sort. There was the Slavianophiles, the ones who loved Slavic, Old Slavic. They said that no, we don't have to go the way which we don't have to go the way which Europe goes. We have our own old Russian way. So we have to go back to the time before how it was in Russia before Peter the Great. We have to go back to the Middle Ages because there, at that time everything was wonderful, and now we got the poison from the West, which is they called it poison, and so we are now separated nation. Only if we go back to history, then we will become a good and content and civilized country. And Dostoevsky was in one part, was in the middle, I would say. Of course, he was not a part of the Western intellectual tribes, but he also didn't like Moscow, the time of Moscow, the era of Moscow very well. He said Moscow is, he rejected this era before Peter the Great. He said that was an ugly time, that wasn't really a time of depression and suppression. And so Peter the Great made an important step we can't go behind. That's not possible. But now we survived, we will live for 150 years with Europe, and Europe has nothing to give us anymore. Nothing to give us. We have to think, to look to ourselves and made a new way, a new step before. And that's very interesting because Dostoevsky didn't say that he said he is anti-Western. He said, no, that was a very important step for us to adopt all the Western concepts and all the Western ideas, but now it's enough. And when he traveled to the West, when he traveled to Germany, a lot of time, he was some years, 80, 60, 2.5 years, he was traveling through Central Europe. He saw all the living situation in Europe, and he didn't like them. I don't know, he couldn't understand anything here in Western Europe. He really didn't understand. And so he created this other. He created this arrogant Europeans. Oh, they think they are civilians. They think that they are far before. They don't like the Russians.
Like arrogant?
Yeah, the arrogant. I would say the arrogant Europeans. And so he got a problem with them, I would say. He came back to Russia and said, the Germans are silly, the French are arrogant, the English are for every nation. He had some really said they are. It's not okay with them. And so he created the other out of, I would say, ressentiment. It's a form of ressentiment, and you have to understand that at that time Russia lost the Crimean War, and it was obvious for everyone that Russia, not only the military structure, but also civil structures, they were not on the top of Europe, they were very down. So you needed reforms. And therefore, it's a form of psychological feeling. So you were down, you were suppressed, the Europeans were obviously much better. And so you create the other out of this feeling. And he created a form of Russian feeling which was opposed to the European rationalism, to the Enlightenment ideas. He said, we have our own Enlightenment in Russia. We don't need Diderot, the French authors and writers and philosophers. We don't need them. We need our own Russian thinking, and that's all. And so it's one form of about years where he created this other, the Russian as the other, to Europe.
How has Dostoevsky's image and how has it influenced? I guess there's like two questions to think about, right? How much of his criticism of the West is replicated today in the geopolitics of like Russia and Europe or the US, and how much of it has gone maybe beyond what he envisioned, in your opinion?
So I would say that most of the contemporary in our times, the right-wing thinkers in Russia, the ultra-fascists, I would say, like Alexander Dugin,
Yeah, exactly.
Dugin, of course, they are really pupils of Dostoevsky. They are, because it's another question if they misunderstood him, but it's really obvious that he gives I would say, he gives the main concepts of the thinking. they are all prepared by Dostoevsky. In Dostoevsky's fight against in his fight against the European rationalism, against the Enlightenment. That's the same we find today when we read Dugin. It
Like,
is the same that the arrogant Europeans, they think they have the everything has to go after they wanted. Who said that there should be universal human rights? No, we have a different culture, and like Dostoevsky said already, we are better one. We have total different concepts, and they always say, looking back to Dostoevsky, saying Dostoevsky is like, I don't know, like in America, like George Washington said already, or something like this. It's it's a whole holy people, I would say, and therefore we find the concepts of the Russian idea, for example. Of course, it is Dostoevsky who founded the thinking, but I would say it's a misunderstanding now in the philosophical writings of the right-wing people now in Russia.
mm. What do you see as kind of the biggest misunderstanding?
I would say Dostoevsky didn't want to separate Europe and Russia in this sharp way. He didn't want to say that we are not that they are evil, or they will only want war, but his dream was something like in future it was something like a synthesis of the European
And the Russian soul?
rationalism and the Russian, I would say, soul, or the Russian emotional
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah. And so they have to come together. And if you read Dugin, on the other hand,
Mm.
he said it's
Eurasia,
not
right? Yeah.
possible. It's not
Yeah.
possible. It's like you can't mix a dog and a cat or something like that. And therefore, uh, that's a misunderstanding. Dostoevsky wouldn't say this, I would say.
That's interesting. And I wanted to ask you, in light of that, how has Dostoevsky, I mean, well, we talked, you mentioned Dugin, right? One of
Mm,
the acolytes behind Vladimir Putin, the intellectual kind of figurehead, and also behind the kind of national populist revival that's going on
mm.
in Europe, even here in the U.S. I was curious, how has the writing of Dostoevsky been appropriated? I don't know if maybe if you've seen any of this in the conflict. How has it been used or instrumentalized? Whether I would imagine mostly in like in a negative way, but how do you see it being kind of used by these individuals like Dugin in this specific geopolitical conflict?
Yeah, you know, in Soviet times, it was always you had to, if you wanted to write an essay or you wanted to write an article and publish it, you always had to do um, two or three quotas from Lenin. From Lenin, you had to start with two quotas or from Lenin, and sometimes in the 40s you had a quota from Stalin, of course. But then you could write everything you wanted. These quotas were important. And you see a lot of written or podcasts. I always look for Russian podcasts, a lot of, and they start with, like Dostoevsky said already, it is, and then there's a quote from Dostoevsky,
That's
and then they,
interesting.
yeah, that really it is
Sorry,
because it's
can you explain that? Why before was it Lenin and now Dostoevsky?
they in Soviet times it was obvious that you have to quote,
Yeah,
of course.
of course.
So you need some legitimation. So you need some, if you want to talk to the people. So you have to show that you know the tradition, that you are in the fluent part of the communication, and that you are that you know everything. And it's a rhetoric advice, I would say. It is a form of rhetoric, captatio benevolentia, and something else, how it is called. And so you always do, oh, this one knows Dostoevsky well. Then he must be an intelligent person. And you see, Dostoevsky is important for two parts. It's, of course, the right-wing philosophers and, of course, for the Christian fundamentalists, for Russian Orthodox thinkers. It's very, very important. And there are some there are some Russian Orthodox priests who are giving podcasts in Russian internet, and you always see that, like Dostoevsky already said, in the West there is no believing, there is no soul, like Dostoevsky said already 150 years ago, and now it's even worse than at that time. So you see, you can use him very well. That's difficult to do it with Chekhov or to do it with Turgenev. But Dostoevsky is like, yeah, he has it already. It's thinking is, you can find this thinking in Dostoevsky. Yeah. Mhm.
The sorry, and just kind of on the conflict, because I'm very curious to know more about kind of Dostoevsky's usage, appropriation in this conflict, the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Do you think
Mhm.
that the conflict can tarnish his legacy? I mean, I know this is kind of a dumb question. I think the answer will be no, obviously, because he's such a great author that will withstand the time. But do you think the usage of him by like the extreme right, it can maybe provoke a counter reaction to kind of the legacy that he has had like outside of Russia?
I can't decide it because it's a really it's an open discussion now.
Oh,
We
really?
have
Oh, okay.
some,
I
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
know it
it's
was
really an
something.
open
Oh, wow.
discussion. We don't know whether it will, in which way we have to go. You know that in the International Dostoevsky Society there are different meanings. That's, of course, you can handle him. You can and say, okay, he is an artist written 150 years ago. So why do we have to talk about him in the in the view of the Russian-Ukraine war? But on the other hand, we have a lot of Ukrainian scholars living in Germany, and we are working together with them, and they have totally different impression. They say, of course, Dostoevsky is responsible for the war. From Putin to Pushkin is a way that we are talking about. I just found a quote from Sergei Zhadan, maybe you know him, he's a very famous Ukrainian poet. He said, in this war, the culture of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy has suffered a crushing defeat. But it's unseemly to gloat. In reality, the collapse of culture results in multiple rocket launchers burning civilians and soldiers.
Wow.
You cannot hide behind Dostoevsky. That's a quote. You
Wow.
cannot hide behind Dostoevsky.
Oh, wow.
That's, of course, the meaning of the Ukrainian civil society. And another very famous scholar of literature, Tamara Kundorova, he said, Russian literature is an accomplice in war against Ukraine. And so that's a discussion we have. And I
Wow.
can't answer it. I can't answer it.
Right, right, right. That wow,
Mhm.
that's fascinating. So it's a very it goes beyond merely art. There's also a very heavy political and cultural component
Yeah,
behind it, correct?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And there are different possibilities to react. So you can say that Dostoevsky is an artist, and don't look at the policy. Policy is a dirty job, I would say, and therefore just look at how great an author. But it's not as possible because Dostoevsky is a writer. He's a journalist. He made his diary of a writer, of course, and there he's very political. He was very uh, yeah, he made very some strange ideas, and which could be said there. And nowadays, these ideas he presented there in the diary of a writer, they are far right. They are really extreme, I would say. On the other hand, there are such novels like Brothers Karamazov and all the others. Uh, they have eternal questions. They are popular and they will remain popular. And therefore, we decided in Germany. You know that I'm I organize the president of the German Dostoevsky Society, and after February 22, we said, what should we do? Should we stop working with the society? Should we quit society? Should we collapse and
Wow.
say, okay, everything is done? And we decided to go on. We had make our book every year. We make our conferences every year, and we decided, I would say, a little bit much more critical than 10 years ago, but nevertheless, we won't stop tweeting Dostoevsky.
Oh no, I'm glad. I'm glad you won't because I guess I agree with what you're saying. I think that there's definitely things that are political in
Hmm.
every artist, right? But then there's that critique or that substance that just transcends the test of time. And I think, like, especially with Brothers Karamazov, I think it's
Hmm.
definitely one of those works that has really withstood, and I really hope it will continue to withstand the test of time, despite the very polarized political moment that we're going through. And I'm sorry to hear about that's been such a fractious topic, which is understandable, obviously, through going through the times that we are going through. But
Hmm.
I wanted to wrap up, and first of all, thank you again for your willingness to join us, to be here with us. I think something that kind of really speaks to the moment and to this whole question of religion versus atheism, faith versus unbelief. These very dialectical, to use a very German
Yes, of course.
expression, right? Terminology, I think, is the parable of the Grand Inquisitor. And I think this is such an important text in Dostoevsky's corpus as a whole. And I wanted you maybe to just explain to us, and even in light of all these discussions that we've been having, what is this parable about? Um, and yeah, and Dostoevsky, I know he uses a term called the Tower of Babel, and what does that mean? So, how do you understand the parable of the Grand Inquisitor?
Yeah, it was the parable of the Grand Inquisitor. It's a part of the novel Brothers Karamazov, and it is Ivan Karamazov who is the author, I would say. Of course, Dostoevsky, the author, but it's a dialogue between Alyosha, as we have talked about it. It's a dialogue, and Ivan starts with it. So it's the expression of a person who is doubting, is really don't know, who doesn't know what to think. And the novel itself is the legend itself. Dostoevsky only says poem, not legend, but the legend it's about Jesus Christ coming back to the earth in the 16th century to Sevilla in Spain at a time where the Inquisition is working hard. I think the day before the Grand Inquisitor burned about 100 souls ad majorem gloriam Dei, how is it called, for the higher honors of God and so. And
The greater
now
glory of God.
yeah, yeah. And now everyone recognizes that's Jesus Christ. It's Jesus Christ, and the people are always wondering, and he's wandering around the people, and then uh, the Grand Inquisitor. It's his point, and it's very interesting this part when the Grand Inquisitor comes with his people and arrests Jesus Christ. And everyone knew that it was Jesus Christ, but nevertheless, nobody said anything against. I don't know if you're looking in Princeton, you see Jesus Christ, and now the police is coming and will arrest Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so you are more afraid against the police than to help Jesus Christ. It's just imagine this. That's for me one of the most important scenes in this legend. Like the people are really scared about the Inquisition, about this person, the Grand Inquisitor, that it's much more important than Jesus. Uh, that's not understandable. And the Grand Inquisitor plans to burn Jesus too, but because Jesus has no right to come back, it's church. We are now the one who represent God on earth and not Jesus Christ. And he talks to him and he tries to convince him. Jesus said no word at all. And in the morning he said, so I won't burn you, go out, but never come back. That's very important. Never come back, he said. And Jesus kissed him. He kissed him, and no word, just the kiss at the end. And yeah, the Grand Inquisitor is often compared with a great big totalitarian dictators in the 20th century. So you have, of course, comparison to Lenin has been made, to Stalin, and now that is, of course, some vision of Putin even. So that's another question, of course. But for me, of course, most important, personal, the question of the three temptations, which are handled by the Grand Inquisitor. And so the message after it is that the freedom of the soul. The freedom of your soul is the most important. No dogma, no political meaning is important. You have to be free, and it's much more important than bread, than might, and authority, which are the three points of the three temptations here, the Grand Inquisitor said.
Sorry, Professor Garska, could you just elaborate on that? Because I think that's such an important topic. It's also one that we talk a lot about here, freedom of the soul or religious liberty or freedom of conscience, right? I think conscience is a word that he uses.
Yeah.
Why is that something important for Dostoevsky in this passage, the freedom of the conscience or the freedom of the soul?
The Grand Inquisitor has a worldview, especially like he looks to humanity, at the human people, human beings, is a very depressive one, a very negative one, because he thinks the people are too weak. They are like children. They need a strong authority. They have no possibility to become free, and if they are free, they are not happy. That's a great problem between freedom or happiness. Both is not possible. So if you are free, you are unhappy. If you have something behind, above you, if you have the church, of course, or a person like the Inquisitor or the Pope, I don't know anyone there, you have not free because he says what to do, but you are happy. And that's the weird view of the Grand Inquisitor. And Jesus says, on the opposite, yeah, of course, you can be free and happy. It's possible. You have to stand it, that you have to decide on your own. You don't have to give up all your rights to a second or third person. It's you, it's your individual soul. You can decide whether you want to be free or not. And therefore, that's so important for our nowadays. And especially, it has become very early, the legend has become very early a prophecy for the different totalitarian movements in the 20th century. It was the wonderful novel of Ehrenburg, Julio Juanito. You have to read it, it's wonderful. And where he goes to the Kremlin and he visits Lenin and he sees Julio Juanito. Yeah, that's not Lenin, that's a Grand Inquisitor. And this novel was written in 1921. So you see that it's a form of prophecy. And therefore, it's this importance, I would say, for nowadays, that you always have the choice. If you want to be free or you give everything. Yeah, it's a situation in Russia today, I would say. Putin did this, and he said, you will get bread, you will get not only bread, you will get holidays in Turkey and the Black Sea, but you have to be calm. And don't think about it. If you're calm, everything is quite okay. But if you want to be free, not in our country, I have to burn you. Yeah, that's a or to shoot you. It's nowadays, or you have to throw you out of the window. Yes, of course.
Oh, and sorry, just to wrap up the question, how do you, I don't know if you remember, he uses the expression Tower of Babel. Do you know
Yeah.
what that means?
Yeah, that's an expression he has already used when he wrote about the in his travel experience, and when he came back from Europe traveling in 1864. He wrote his winter impressions of summer. I don't know the English title. Winter impressions of summer experiences. It's very famous, and there he visited. He said how he visited the World exhibition in London, and there was a Crystal Palace. That's very
Oh yeah,
one,
from Notes
and
of the Underground.
yeah, from not from the other end in this winter impressions from summer experiences. I think that's okay. And then he said, and that reminded me to the Tower of Babel. It was the first time when he used it. Tower of Babel is for him capitalism. It is a form of the people building materialism, I would say. It's only thinking earthly desires to fulfill them earthly desires, and nothing. And you forgot Christ in your soul. And so, if the people, if you look in the Bible, if the people would have be really humble to Jesus, if they would be really had heard about about God, and if they wouldn't have built it. So it's a human hybris, and that's materialism. That's capitalism in his times. And he used it in the same case in Brothers Karamazov. Tower of Babel is always a part, it's always a critics of the Western style of life.
Wow, human greed and consumption
Yeah, yeah.
and hyper individuality without God. Wow,
Yes,
thank you so much, Professor Gartska. It's really been a privilege having you here on our platform and knowing more about Dostoevsky at such a deep and profound level. Also, hearing your own personal story and interaction with this great figure of Russian and world literature. And I wanted to conclude with our final question. It's a question we always ask our guests. I understand the importance of not falling into the trap of what we would call presentism. And it's always, I think, important to avoid anachronisms when we approach a writer like Dostoevsky. But in light of everything that we talked about, the current controversies, right, that problems or issues that we're going through in geopolitics, despite that, how do you think his writings still speak to some of the existential and other questions that that I hate to use the word, but the West or the world outside of Russia is grappling with currently?
Um, I would say that this you have to, Russia made a very it was only 200 years the development of Russia like a European government. I would say it was starting with Peter the Great. In 200 years, they became a total different state with all the contradictory feelings, meanings, all the ideas. And if you want to understand Russia, you have to read Dostoevsky, but because he is, even today, because he's the one who represents this distinction, the different ideas from the West and from the own history, from thinking about God, thinking about the human being on Earth, the very best. And so I would say, if you want, if you and we have to talk further on with Russia and the Russian people, it's a way. You have to read Dostoevsky.
Mm.
And the second one is, I would say, if you're personally really interested, as I've said, in the eternal questions, no nationality behind, but just the questions, being a person on this earth Is there a God? Is there no one? Why is he evil? You have to read him too. These are the 2 points, I would say.
And thank you
Sorry.
for watching another episode of Artificial Hearts. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Greetings over the ocean.